Hi, this is Group 5. My name is Matt Tefetti, and my group members are Corolla Torres and Ashlyn Thomas, and this is our Goeller Matrix. Our Goeller Matrix is focusing on reducing motor vehicle injuries and fatalities, and our three solution options that we're looking at are increased legislation on primary seatbelt laws, increasing sobriety checkpoints, and increasing the use of ignition interlocks.
Primary enforcement of seatbelt use laws permits seatbelt use law violators to be stopped and cited independently of any other traffic behavior. Secondary enforcement laws allow violators to be cited only after they have been stopped for some other traffic violation. Only 34 states have primary seatbelt laws. Of those, 11 do not enforce rear seatbelt use. Seatbelt use is higher in states with primary seatbelt laws. Those who do not wear a seatbelt are twice as likely to be injured or die in a motor vehicle accident. Unbelted occupants increase rate of injury to others by 40%. Belted drivers saw a 137% increase in fatal injury when the passenger seated behind them did not wear a seatbelt. This increases further with more unbelted rear passengers. Seatbelt laws have increased the use and enforcement of safe driving, but there are still some variations in the laws by each state. Seatbelt use continued to be higher in states with primary laws implemented, as compared with states which have weaker secondary belt laws or no seatbelt laws. As of July 2010, primary belt use laws were in place in 31 states and the District of Columbia. Secondary enforcement laws were in 18 states, and only one state, New Hampshire, had no belt use law applicable to adults. For example, the majority of leaders in New Hampshire consider that in order to have a good policy, citizens should have the right to make their own decisions in terms of wearing a seatbelt. Research has shown that minorities perceive stricter enforcement than whites. However, after primary seatbelt laws are put into effect, the rate of citations increased among all races and that no evidence was found for racial profiling. Developing culturally sensitive material that is digestible for minority audiences will also have to be addressed. Some states have seen strong opposition to seatbelt laws. In state legislatures, primary seatbelt laws have seen some bipartisan support, but legislation tends to be brought forward by Democrats more often than Republicans. A common concern among Republicans and the opposition concerns the breach of personal freedoms. Other concerns are philosophical issues such as the role of government, enforcement issues such as profiling, and emotional issues such as fear of drowning and water crashes.
Sobriety checkpoints. Sobriety checkpoints, also called DUI checkpoints, are locations where law enforcement officers are stationed to check drivers for signs of intoxication and impairment. 37 states use sobriety checkpoints. Effectiveness. This solution has high effectiveness as it will reduce the fatality rate for all occupants in comparison to the absence of a seatbelt use law. Exposure to unbelted passengers was associated with a 40% higher risk of injury. Research has also found that seatbelt use is associated with a 45% decrease in fatal injury and 50% decrease in all other injuries. Stakeholder support and opposition. Supporters such as Matt have developed comprehensive analysis on sobriety checkpoints and claim that there is a 70% reduction in drunk driving with the use of sobriety checkpoints. The alcohol industry is opposed to such legislation. For example, U.S. alcohol producers have collectively decided against marketing and advertising in association with driving. However, advertisement conducted with race car driving events might violate the aforementioned pledge. Equity. Investigations have found that sobriety checkpoints can be overutilized in minority neighborhoods and underutilized in predominantly white neighborhoods. In Chicago, it was found that 84% of the roadside checks were scheduled in areas populated mostly by minorities, while roadways in areas with more DUI-related crashes that are predominantly white are checked less often or not at all. The investigation also found that predominantly white districts only have 4% of checkpoints despite accounting for 25% of alcohol related accidents. Sobriety checkpoints will need to have strong oversight to ensure localities use them equitably.
Political feasibility. The political feasibility of sobriety checkpoints lies on state decisions. State might interpret the Constitution differently and therefore not conduct checkpoints. For example, sobriety checkpoints are illegal under Texas' interpretation of the federal Constitution. Furthermore, some state budgets prohibit funds for being spent on sobriety checkpoints. Due to the legality of sobriety checkpoints in some states, political feasibility will be low depending on the state as it will require interpretation of constitutions.
Ignition interlocks. According to the CDC, an alcohol ignition interlock is a breath test device connected to a vehicle's ignition. The vehicle will not start unless the driver blows into the interlock and has a blood alcohol concentration below a preset low limit, usually 0.02 BAC. Only 29 states require ignition interlocks for offenders. Effectiveness. Installation of ignition interlocks reduces repeat driving while intoxicated, or DWI's offenses, by 70%. States that have passed ignition interlock laws have seen a decrease in drunk driving deaths. It is up to the jurisdiction of the states on the requirement of ignition interlocks. Stakeholder support and opposition. MAD supports the required usage of ignition interlock devices for all convicted drunk drivers. MAD calls for longer ignition interlock periods for repeat offenders. Meanwhile, the American Beverage Institute believes that the use of ignition interlocks will eliminate people's ability to have a glass of wine at dinner or a beer at a ball game and drive home. Equity. Only 29 states require ignition interlocks for offenders. Increased court monitors on the device usage as well as increased funds and resources to assess effectiveness are needed, which states may lack funding for. Servicing ignition interlocks may contribute a larger burden to poor and working class offenders than the rich. A case from Washington saw a fisherman go to court because he was working multiple days back to back and was unable to get his ignition interlock serviced in time.
Political feasibility. All states have ignition interlock programs. Currently, ignition interlock laws are voluntary and weakly written. Considering there would already be a framework to work with in all states, this solution would be more politically feasible as all that would be needed is an expansion of these programs. Currently, only 29 states require mandatory ignition interlocks among those convicted for drunk driving. Ideally, this would be expanded to include all states. However, judges have shown some hesitance to the use of ignition interlocks for convicted drunk drivers.
These are the solution evaluations for our three solutions. Sobriety checkpoints came in at third place with 10 out of 20. Ignition interlocks came in second place with 13 out of 20, and primary seatbelt laws came in first place with 16 out of 20.
As a group, we believe that increased implementation and enforcement of seatbelt legislation will be the best solution to the reduction of MVA resulting in injury or death after assessment of the effectiveness, equity, stakeholder support, and political feasibility of the proposed solutions.